Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great lineup for you. As always, here is what is on the show today. We're continuing to track this big Omicron variant situation. 750 plus U.S. flights have been canceled as airlines continue to dig out from staffing shortages, but it's okay because apparently the Delta CEO now gets to just boss around the CDC director and just do whatever, just get whatever he wants from our nation's biggest health body, which is totally fine, but also we're taking a look at how Omicron is affecting Europe, leaving tests and patients in short supply, according to the New York Times. Also, the United States torturing of Afghanistan continues. As this in The Intercepts, more people may die from sanctions than from 20 years of war, showing the brutality and just the complete inhumanity of the U.S. empire. As, you know, we really should start to question how much credit Biden gets for this whole Afghanistan withdrawal in general, and really what the true purpose of it was. Also, Joe Rogan has announced his 2020 election predictions, who he thinks will have the best shot to win. And Harry Reid, the former Democratic Senate Majority Leader, probably the last Democrat who was actually an effective politician in any stretch, in any kind of public life, has passed away at 82. We'll remember him and take a look at a story from a few years back that really shows you how far the Democratic Party has fallen, even from just a few decades back. Yeah, really, really crazy stuff. Ryan Graham, great reporter there, as always. Although, when he did come on Newsflash, he dipped early from my show to go on Hassan Piker's stream to promote his new book. And that was even before Hassan Piker was even that big. But anyway, yeah, still love Ryan Graham, and I still love, like Matt Chrisman, for example, Chapo Trap House, even though he just spent 30 minutes pretty much yelling at me for that interview. But anyway, yeah, it looks like, by the way, the United States not the only one having trouble with tests at this point, because people are wanting to get tested. They think they're getting sick. They know this virus is highly transmissible, and it is crazy. So this is the New York Times now. Across Europe, records for new coronavirus infections are falling by the day as Omicron variant tears through the populations with swiftness, outpacing anything witnessed in the past 2 years of the pandemic. There are case records have shattered. I think we beat it all the time. Case high in the States here yesterday. So that is definitely not good. But deaths are also down 3%. Don't know about hospitalizations, but it was down 3% deaths, still hovering around 1,000, pretty much exactly where it was before. It was a slight uptick in some areas, but even that now has calmed down. But obviously something definitely to keep an eye on. But the cases are the big story in terms of surge. While there are early indications that the variant might be milder than the previous version of the virus, with vaccination boosters and previous infections all offering some protection against serious illness and death, the surge of infections is sowing its own chaos as people scramble to obtain tests, businesses grapple with staff shortages, and New Year's festivities are thrown into question. So this is the thing, and really why I disagree and kind of question some of the reaction that I've seen from some people, even on the left, who want to be kind of critical of Biden, critical of the CDC. I grant them it certainly does not look good with that kind of Delta relationship. I don't like that at all. But if we are seeing, I just don't get what the point is. If you are still maybe there is a explanation. I've been looking for it. I have not been able to find it as of yet. But if you are suffering from mild, you're pretty much asymptomatic, but you have COVID and you pretty much feel fine, why would you want to stay in your house for 5 days? Maybe you don't want to go to work. I definitely get that, especially, people have tough jobs or whatever, but in terms of just being excluded from all kind of events and just kind of shutting down society, I just do not see why that is necessary and why that is healthy in any stretch at this point. Obviously, with the beginning of the pandemic, it was a lot different, but, where we are now, just do not see it. So, England and Northern Ireland on Wednesday, there was no PCR test appointments available to book online, and around midday, many people reported that none were available to order through British government's health services. People are showing up at the pharmacies to pick up these quick lateral flow tests, according to industry reps, but are often leaving empty-handed. So, yeah, the NHS, they're not doing quite a good job Sajid Javid better get on that real quick. In Spain, which is reporting roughly 100,000 daily infections for the first time in the pandemic, contact tracing efforts are being overwhelmed, and people are lining up outside hospitals urgently seeking tests so they could be approved for medical leave. Although Spain is not seeing a sharp rise in people needing intensive care, Mario Fontan of Spanish Epidemiology Society said that concerns over the infections were rising. A sensation of greater chaos has been created compared to the severity that the clinical picture requires. So, yeah, that is because when you see these long lines, when you see, I think the key thing here is, easy access to tests, making these, really, really speeding up the ability for people to kind of know they have COVID and figuring out what that right quarantine time is and how much, if you have COVID, do you not want to spread it to people, or 2, 3, 4 days, I don't know, at least that's going off what the flu is, because again, I think that is kind of the overall path for this virus. But yeah, that is definitely something to watch. I think the key thing there is a sensation of greater chaos has been created to the severity the clinical picture requires, he told Spanish media. Yeah, so that kind of shows you exactly where things are here. Portugal had one of the most successful vaccination campaigns in the world, reaching nearly every single person eligible and driving out of the death toll brought by the Delta variant. But infections are climbing again, with the health minister Marta Temido warning that the number of infections could double every 8 days, given the current trend of Omicron cases. Again, cases are the shift here is going to be very interesting to see, from kind of cases to if we end up focusing more on things like deaths, hospitalizations. Is that really a problem? Even in the Netherlands, which nearly 2 weeks ago became the only country in Europe to reimpose a nationwide lockdown, Omicron is spreading still. So, this kind of shows you, with the transmissibility of this, especially, I think I don't know how outside transmission is infected, because for example, I literally just hours before this was COVID tested, and I had to wait outside for 2 hours in a tent and also wearing a mask. So I don't know what the kind of scientific explanation for that is. Because pretty much from what I've heard, there is literally, oh my goodness Christ, someone is setting off a bomb. No, it's just a dump truck, very in close proximity. Apologize for that. Even though it may sound like, I'm being aerially bombarded, that is not quite the case. So yeah, the faster spread of Omicron in the Omicron variant will lead to additional infections in the near future, which will also increase the number of hospital admissions, the Institute said. Because, yeah, infection, I feel like since data on hospitalizations lags behind reports of infection, scientists caution it is too soon to gauge Omicron's wave effect on the healthcare systems. At the moment, none of the nations in Europe are setting records for infections. Are reporting precipitous rise in hospitalizations, although the surge is only a few weeks old. So that's definitely something we're going to have to watch there. Hospitalizations, yes. I think that, I have not been able to understand clearly, I think, a reason yet as to why that would happen. I just do not know why in the world it would be sensible for us to go down the path of freaking out over cases. As long as tests need to be made, tests should be made accessible as much as possible, and again, figuring out that right quarantine period just seems to be the key. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson cited the preliminary data to justify his decision not to step up restrictions. We are looking at the data, and we are seeing what we're seeing is we have got cases certainly going up. We've got a lot of cases of Omicron. But on the other hand, we can see the data about the relative mildness of Omicron. Also, Boris Johnson has been caught pretty much about 3 billion times, and so is everyone in his government, breaking all the COVID restrictions he set. In pictures and videos and everything like that, it has been so kind of clear and just flagrant. So that may be a little bit also behind this kind of hesitation to add back COVID restrictions so fast, which I think is certainly sensible. But again, tracking the coronavirus just in general. Again, new deaths in the States, 1,243, down 3% on 14 days. 267 cases, though, is the 126% surge on 14 days that people is really eye-popping for a lot of people. Worldwide, it's 51% plus on 14 days for cases and down 10% death-wise on that front as well. And you can kind of see in terms of cases, in terms of definitely like the most populous states would kind of be the most cases. You're seeing like Florida, you're seeing New York, not really California and Texas and stuff like that yet, but that is going to be another kind of interesting thing to watch. The U.S. Record for daily cases have been broken as two highly contagious variants, Delta and Omicron, have converged again to disrupt this travel situation. All right, so that's pretty much where we stand right now. The biggest question is, again, watching those hospitalizations, watching those deaths, seeing how they do as this kind of lagging indicator situation continues, and we find out what that lag would be. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, happy holidays, and thank you so much for supporting us this year. We are willing to give the gift of audio to you this holiday season, and boy, will it keep coming. We have an action-packed schedule through the 17th of December to the 16th of January, and that all starts with new episodes of Newsflash now 3 times a week on our old summer schedule of Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In addition, Hidden History returns with 6 select episodes, 4 on Tuesdays and 2 on select Thursdays, to give you the perfect historical narrative to keep you interested through those times with the family this holiday season. It's been such a great year, and it couldn't have been as good for the Spencer Walsh Radio Network without your support. So, to another year of great audio. Time to move now to our next story, which is really kind of a pretty crazy situation. This is by Li Fang in The Intercepts. So the headline here, humanitarian exemptions to crushing U.S. sanctions do little to prevent the collapse of Afghanistan's economy. So when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan in August, ceding to the Taliban, the country's economy began a severe contraction, what the Financial Times calls one of the worst economic meltdowns in history. The sprawling crisis has left near than 23 million people in extreme hunger. At least 1 million children under the age of 5 right now facing imminent and immediate threat of starvation. Again, so this is going to be used as a lot of people to say, we should have stayed in Afghanistan, but any real logical kind of, as we will lay out here, and the sanctions that imposed, and any kind of real logical reading the situation would say the U.S.'s involvement is incredibly responsible for this situation. So, as many as 300,000 Afghanistans has fled to neighboring Pakistan, and many more refugees will soon leave the country. There are some reports that Afghans have even resorted to selling their children in order to feed their families. What the? Oh my God, that's just horrific. The Biden administration defends the sanctions by pointing to so this is, largely this contraction has been a result of the sanctions pretty much seeming the Taliban in really only in name only and trying to drive them from power. But the effect that it's had, as it's had so many other places where the U.S. has tried this over the world, is to really cause misery and destruction for the civilians. And, sanctions very, very, very rarely ever work. And, if they do, the human cost and the civilian cost and the death that comes with it, that's just completely underreported, is so it just not acknowledged, is so great. So the Biden administration defends these sanctions by pointing to a series of exemptions designed to allow humanitarian aid. The Treasury Department has touted its role as a leading humanitarian donor to the people of Afghanistan, and its work to ensure that funds flow through legitimate and transparent channels via official sanction exemption licenses. But those humanitarian exemptions overseen by the Treasury Office's Foreign Assets Control are nowhere near enough, according to experts who spoke to The Intercept. So these OFAC licenses, Office of Foreign Asset Control licenses, including new licenses released on December 22nd, have not curbed the global chilling effect of the sanctions and are ineffective in preventing a spiraling disaster that could kill more Afghan people than nearly 20 years of U.S.-backed war and occupation. So not only do they terrorize the country, not only do they corrupt the government, and make it just completely unfunctional, when they leave, they put so much sanctions on the new government, the Taliban, because they don't like them, and they were pretty much embarrassed. The United States was by the Taliban, so they can just make the people miserable. Like, what is the end goal here? Like, if Afghanistan wants to be ruled by the Taliban, they're going to be ruled by the Taliban. Like, it's is the end goal regime change? Is it a new government? Like, what? I thought we already tried that for the last 20 years. Like, this is just not the. It's a sad situation. Taliban are awful people, horribly discriminatory. In so many ways, murderous. All that kind of stuff. But at some point, you just have to let the people eat. I think businesses and individuals that violate the U.S. sanctions on the Taliban risk steep fines and criminal penalties. The broad sanctions imposed by the U.S. lack specificity and raise the possibility that routine commercial activities in Afghanistan could fall under sanctions policy. None of these OFAC licenses, none of them address the issue of international banks, and they're dealing with Afghan banks' hesitancy to deal with Afghan taxes, banking transactions for commercial imports, says Shah Marabi, a member of the Afghan Central Bank Board. The sanctions have created a lot of fear in the minds of those who do not want to go ahead and engage in taking this particular risk. So, why not? If you're an international bank, you want to help in some way or want to invest, build back in any kind of way. You may very well be on the wrong side of the United States. Very unappealing prospect for a lot of different people. So the OFAC has issued licenses for medicine, remittances, education salaries, and other forms of humanitarian assistance. That just, again, does not seem to be getting through. Additional licenses released last week allow the exemptions for education funds and expand the scope of U.S. funds to aid organizations in Afghanistan. Marabi, who teaches economics, I was literally about to say, at Montgomery College of Maryland, noted that much of Afghanistan's domestic economy faces impending failure, a problem that cannot be solved by merely allowing humanitarian aid to flow. It's very much like you can't just send money. Like, you have to, at some point, you have to let the Afghanistan economy flourish on its own, find its own way. The Treasury Department, added Marabi, has focused on piecemeal humanitarian exemptions and not addressed the central issue of how Afghanistan can import and export goods, collect taxes, and pay salaries. We are talking about an economy that's going to collapse if the Treasury does not clarify what can be done to the liquidity issue. So just the very basic functions that a country literally needs to survive, to be considered a sovereign nation, are kind of on the verge of collapsing here. So when the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan in August, U.S. sanctions imposed in 2002 that criminalized any form of support for the Taliban as a specially designated global terrorist group suddenly meant the penalties could apply to leaders of a sovereign state. As U.S. forces withdrew, American law firms quickly alerted international institutions across the globe that any business transaction in Afghanistan could risk violating the sanctions. Any routine tax payment or duty paid to an Afghan bureaucrat could be construed as aiding and abetting the Taliban, because the bureaucrats will, eventually have to answer to the Taliban. And the sanctions, being very broad, really prevented any kind of economic activity, any kind of functioning of flowing of goods and resources in any really basic way from ever even happening, which is kind of insane and also incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So that is something that is kind of happening very much under the radar, because almost in a way, this is considered the right foreign policy response. This is considered normal. This is considered good and healthy, because we got to show the Taliban, and this is causing mass death and destruction in Afghanistan. Oh, it's okay, because we'll get the Taliban out anytime soon. That is just absolutely just psychotic behavior. All right, now we're going to get into this now, because it's kind of a time-honored tradition to get into Joe Rogan and freak out about Joe Rogan, because I cannot tell you, and especially the past few years with the vaccine information stuff, misinformation stuff he's been saying about, and how CNN and all these people have been very petrified of everything Joe Rogan has ever done. It's he's often portrayed as a kind of sinister mastermind who is like very much a right-wing figure, radicalizing people, turning them against traditional sources of news, which is, I think, really most mainstream media people's big problem with them, or with him. And, it's kind of tough to forget that, this guy endorsed Bernie Sanders and thinks that, Michelle Obama could beat Trump in 2024. Like, this guy is not somebody who is, like, a sinister figure. We're trying to get the clip up of what he said.
Please.
Just had it there. Okay. Let's see if we can get it. So this is a show called Rising. But now with the new host, they like to cover pretty much every time Joe Rogan breathes. But yeah, here's what he said.
Obama runs,
she
wins.
Yeah.
I think she wins.
She's good.
She's great.
Yeah,
she's
good.
intelligent.
Yeah.
She's articulate. She's
Right.
the wife of the best president that we
Right.
have had
Right.
in our lifetime in terms
Right.
of like a representative of intelligent,
sure.
articulate people. She could win.
Rogan went on to say that the only thing that would stop her is if she bought into some of the policies that are destroying businesses in America, that are making people scared. If she somehow or another supported or showed any support for lockdowns and mandates and all of this craziness that's going on.
Yeah, again, so this is so many people in either way. I think there's a big tendency on the right to think, Joe Rogan's like the coolest thing, the coolest person ever. Like, he's like a guy who sticks it to all the libs, and all the libs would turn around and be like, Joe Rogan is like a secret fascist who's radicalizing Americans. But I think the best and the only way you can really kind of understand Joe Rogan is somebody who, at the end of the day, is pretty much and there's the kind of small cadre of people on the left who are like, Joe Rogan's great. He's like a secret actual left. No, Joe Rogan is literally a pretty solid, I would say, representation of a huge chunk of Americans, the way they think, the dumb political opinions that they have, and that is pretty much what all you need to understand. There's nothing sinister. There's no there. It's not that hard to really understand. The idea that Michelle Obama, first of all, would run for president in the first place is kind of laughable. And the idea that she would ever win is also very laughable. But the idea that if she showed support for vaccine mandates and all this craziness and all this stuff that I disagree with, she would definitely lose. Again, this is just absolutely really just low rank kind of base political analysis, and people are either so scared or so in love with this guy. It's just calm the heck down. There's just so many people who either Vulture or some kind of Variety magazine or New Yorker writers who want to tell you Joe Rogan wants to kill everybody, or somebody on the new right or something like that who Joe Rogan is the best person, the new source of news for all of America and is the best. But the truth is, there at the end of the day, it is something very much in between. It's not it's not like he is really the person who, in the end of the day, it's not like he's the the person who's going to be deciding things a lot for a lot of people, I think, politically, but he's a source of a lot of people's trust because I think he thinks, talks, and acts like most Americans who, rightfully so, just don't care about politics that much, see it all as a show, and something that just is not going to affect their lives that much, and say, Michelle Obama, she's nice, she's smart, but I don't like those lockdowns, so, I probably wouldn't support her if she support those lockdowns, but other than that, she's pretty cool. That is it. My New Year's resolution for all you guys about Joe Rogan is calm the heck down.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh.
It's News Flash.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our final story of the day, and it's about the passing of quote-unquote Lion of the Senate, Harry Reid, from Nevada, and Senate Majority Leader, dead at 82 last night. Died literally at the same time as John Madden. So rest in peace, John Madden. Great football guy there. So this is in New York Times, Jonathan Martin writing, Harry M. Reid, the Democrat who rose from childhood poverty. Really kind of a crazy story. He rose, childhood poverty in rural Nevada. And yeah, again, it's just I very much apologize for all this ridiculous noise that is going on in the background. I don't know how much it's kind of picking up because it's very loud in my ears, but it just sounds like someone is just being beaten or just some craziness going on, some bombs or a war is going on behind me. It is not the case. Just very, very loud construction. But Reid, anyway, passed away on Tuesday in Henderson, Nevada. He was 82. He'd been treated for pancreatic cancer, which was diagnosed in 2018, but lived to see the Las Vegas airport renamed for him earlier this month. So nice. His death was confirmed in statements from Steve Sisolak of Nevada and Chuck Schumer, the Democratic Majority Leader of the Senate. Even by the standards of the political profession, where against the odds biographies are common and modest roots an asset, what Reid overcame was extraordinary. He was raised in almost Dickensian circumstances in tiny Searchlight, Nevada. His home had no indoor plumbing. His father was an alcoholic miner who eventually died by suicide. His mother helped the family survive by taking in laundry from local brothels. After 2 decades of campaigns in Nevada marked by success, setback, and recovery, he was elected to the Senate in 1986, where he became the Chamber's Democratic leader after the 2004 election. But it was not until his colleague Barack Obama was elected president for 4 years later that Reid was able to meld his deep knowledge of congressional rules, his facility with horse trading, and cussed determination to unify a 60-seat majority and pass landmark legislation. So really, I think if you want to look at some of the biggest accomplishments of the Barack Obama presidency, or accomplishments watered down for what they were, I think you gotta really, really look at Harry Reid as kind of a hidden force behind a lot of them, because as kind of very, he was no great kind of left wing guy, but he did very much become a lot more left wing as he got older. But one thing he really wanted to do, just generally throughout his life, was get stuff done. He was from a kind of a real bygone era that just does not exist anymore, of politicians whose first priority was actually getting stuff done, not looking good, not appearing smart and intellectual like Barack Obama's kind of biggest concern was. Because back at that time, when Harry Reid was kind of in politics, you almost kind of had to deliver, or there would be some real consequences. If Harry said he would do something, he did it. President Biden, who served as Obama's vice president, said, we'll get to Biden and Reid's relationship in a second, though, said in a statement Tuesday evening, if he gave you his word, you can bank on it. That's how we got things done for the good of the country for decades. Pushing through a sweeping economic stimulus after the Great Recession, a new set of rules governing Wall Street, and the most significant expansion of healthcare coverage since the Great Society in the 1960s, all with scant Republican support, and by the way, did not go far enough. I think because a lot of the biggest, because really the way it worked with the Obama administration was Harry was come on, Obama, we gotta abolish the filibuster, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. You're taking too long here. We gotta actually get the stuff done. This is not good. Obama's just a few more negotiations, we'll get this. Finally they ended up convincing him to nuke the filibuster on judicial nominees. Which was, very, very good, and something that, I've heard people kind of saying, and I think, smartly so, because people, actually who understood Harry Reid's legacy about actually caring about getting stuff done, were kind of being hey, why don't we abolish Harry Reid, or honor Harry Reid by abolishing the filibuster, not something he would want, but it's kind of ridiculous. The records would be written about the 8 years of Obama and Reid. Reid boasted shortly after he announced in 2015 that he would not seek re-election the following year. Probably would have been a lot better than someone like Chuck Schumer, someone who's just, again, a very weak-minded person and just does not have the same kind of political priorities, unless he's staring down the barrel of a possible AOC primary. But, again, it's really someone who a Democrat, the last Democrat, I would say, in any kind of public position of power, like Senate Majority Leader, Speaker of the House, or anything like that, any kind of prominent Democratic Party leader who actually cared about getting stuff done and fighting, in any type of way. So, 3-decade Senate tenure of the soft-spoken yet ferociously combative Nevadan, a middleweight boxer in his youth, also traced the chamber's evolution from a collegial, consensus-oriented institution to the partisan fraction body it has become. So Republicans, of course, they blame Reid for this, and, probably a lot of establishment media does too. But, again, what it had become is this, the reality of the Senate at the time was it was just completely rudderless and ineffective. It was not, it was a body that, for a long time, it kind of served to, uphold the status quo in a big way, stopping the civil rights legislation, things like that. But, just the way political times have shifted, a lot of that stuff just was not a reality. And first elected to the House of Representatives in 1982, when Nevada finally grew large enough to require a second seat, he kind of arrived at the Capitol as a moderate Western Democrat opposed to abortion rights, largely supportive of gun rights and uneasy about immigration. But as Nevada grew overwhelmingly from a rural white redoubt of ranchers and mines and to a polyglot gambling mecca in which 70% of the voters live in the Las Vegas area, Reid adapted as a matter of necessity. When he won his final election in 2010, a dismal year for Democrats nationally, thanks in part to an outpouring of support from the state's rapidly growing Hispanic and Asian communities after his popularity with other Nevadans had plummeted after the economic collapse. So, immigrants really, in the end, in 2010, got him across the line. So he was a politician who recognized that and kind of thanked them for it. I kind of want to go to this story here by Ryan Grimm about how it gives a very fascinating window into kind of how Reid operated in general. As the year 2012 wound down, Democrats hopefully eyed what looked to be one of the last opportunities for genuine legislative progress in a divided government. The party just stomped Republican Mitt Romney at the polls in a post-Occupy campaign that centered on economic inequality. Democrats picked up 2 seats in the Senate, expanding their majority and adding Elizabeth Warren to their ranks. Though Democrats won more House votes nationwide and picked up a net of 8 seats, Republicans held on to the newly gerrymandered lower chamber. The hope was tied to the expiration of the tax cuts passed under George W. Bush. Republicans, despite losing the popular vote and only taking the White House in 2000 by a 5-4 Supreme Court decision, moved swiftly to pass an enormous tax cut tilted heavily towards the rich. To do so, they used a parliamentary procedure known as budget reconciliation. We're all familiar with that today, I'm sure. The cost of doing so, however, is the policy enacted through reconciliation must expire in 10 years' time. By the time the legislation was set to expire in 2010, the Tea Party wave had shaken up Congress. The Obama White House urged the Senate Democrats to extend the tax cuts, arguing they both had a difficult political hand, and also extending them in an unstable economic environment was good policy. So, again, making those Bush tax cuts permanent, I think he ended up making mostly the kind of a lower, kind of middle-class ones more permanent, but, not if White House economic advisor Larry Summers had anything to say about it. He told a private meeting of the Financial Committee Democrats that lowering the tax cuts, or allowing the tax cuts to expire, would tank the economy, according to a Senate aide at the time. So again, Larry Summers, probably one of the most wrong, financial analysts of the last 10, 15 years, went in there. So that obviously sends off a whole slew of negotiations that would involve a cast of characters from throughout the White House and across the aisle in the Senate. Its resolution, though ultimately hinged on the intervention of the then Vice President and now leading contender for the presidency, Joe Biden. He had cited his ability to work with Republicans and conservative Democrats up to and including segregationists as one of his top qualifications for president. As we saw, that worked so well for the past years in trying to get Republicans on board. This makes his role in the tax cut fight perhaps the most significant involvement in policymaking as vice president, critical to examine closely. The Senate agreed to a 2-year expansion in the end of 2010, but only after Bernie Sanders delivered his viral 8-hour old-fashioned filibuster in the Senate floor to draw attention to the fiscal giveaway. The extension meant that the tax cuts were now going to be expiring in 2012, and the order to repeal them all, to go over what the media had been calling the, quote, fiscal cliff, all Congress had to do was nothing. That, Harry Reid told me in a brief for my new book, Ryan Grimm's new book, was precisely his plan. I wanted to go over the cliff, said Reid, Senate Majority Leader at the time. I thought the best thing would have the best thing to do. It would have been the best thing to do because the conversation would not have been about raising taxes, which it became. It would have been about lowering taxes. In other words, let all the rates go up and then bargain with Republicans to reduce tax rates for just the middle class and the poor, which is, the actual sensible that is, I don't care what Larry Summers says is good economic policy. It's proven to work time and time again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, so then Minority Leader Mitch McConnell similarly knew the difficult position going over the cliff would put him in. In preliminary talks with Reid, he agreed to let rates on people making more than $250K go back up if to slightly lower levels to pre-Bush. McConnell aides would later say that McConnell not firmly conceded anything, that negotiations were not finalized, whatever. McConnell had a strong sense Reid intended to go over the cliff and put Republicans up against the wall. Told that Reid had since confirmed that he wanted to go over, a Republican operative had found the admission unsurprising. That's consistent with his body language at the time, said the operative. He knew he could blame it successfully on the hard right of the Republican Party. Negotiations to reach an impasse. It wasn't just spin. Reid was ready to go over, and that would have been really kind of a significant moment. Reid had felt like he successfully pushed McConnell to the brink, buoyed by House Speaker John Boehner's inability to get his unruly conference to agree on anything. It was now Sunday, December 30th, almost where we are now, and Democrats only had to hold out until Tuesday to find themselves in a really dramatically improved political position, and actually in a position to hammer the Republicans on why do you not want to lower taxes on the middle class and raise taxes on the rich. And that would have been incredibly influential, as the dawning of the new year would mean that tax cuts expired and ultimately reverted to pre-Bush levels. And at that point, it would be Republicans left pleading for the rate cuts. In desperation, McConnell reached out directly to Biden, calling him on the phone and explaining Reid was refusing to be reasonable. Over the course of the day, McConnell and Biden just independently strike a deal. Biden gave Republicans pretty much everything they wanted in exchange for fixing the fiscal cliff problem. The GOP operative recalled Biden, who served in the Senate from 1973 to 2009 as vice president from 2009 until 2017, and is now locked in his third Democratic primary contest for the presidential nomination. As at that time, this was written in 2019. The reason he has such good relationships with the Senate is that he never hesitates to put aside the highest priorities of his base in the interests of compromise. And you really could kind of see it in the negotiations of the Build Back Better bill, as every kind of popular priority Democrats refused to fight for, and just publicly were like, nope, student debt, nope, healthcare, nope, all that kind of stuff. Climate change, we're cutting that. Universal pre-K, we're cutting that, all that kind of stuff up and down the legislation, cut. And that is really how you get people excited for a thing and ready to fight for it. Great politician Biden is. I could see this stuff clear as day, and calling it a failure, calling the failure months and months before it actually happens. You've listened to Newsflash. If you have, at least for the past few months, you would know I've pretty much been saying that exactly as it's been happening. And I am somebody who is not even legally allowed to drink alcohol. If Biden has been in the Senate for freaking 40 years, it's not like he doesn't. I really feel like it's not like he doesn't know this either. It's, either he's a dupe or we're all kind of being duped. I feel like chances are it's more of the second. I think would be the situation for sure. So on the morning of New Year's Eve, Reid was feeling good about the position, but that was until he saw McConnell take it to the Senate floor and announce that he had been in talks with the vice president and they were progressing well. He was hopeful he'd have the legislation to move forward by the end of the day. As the details began to leak out, progressive Democratic senators were floored. A large group of them, including Sherrod Brown, Jeff Merkley, Sheldon Whitehouse, Al Franken, and Tom Harkin of Iowa stormed over to Reid's office. The deal was awful, they told Reid, and had to be stopped. Reid told them what had happened, and it was out of his hands that McConnell had gone around to Biden, and said he was working on approving it and would be in touch throughout the day. None of the senators had any business scheduled. It was New Year's Eve, after all, so Sanders invited them back to his office in the Dirksen building. The Hart building had a popcorn machine, so Harkin asked his staff to bring some by. The crew ended up spending several hours together in Sanders' office, thinking of potential strategies of opposition and waiting to hear from Reid. Instead, one senator's phone rang. It was Biden calling to sell the deal he'd cut. In classic Biden fashion, he offered a 10 to 15 minute soliloquy, a meandering argument that largely boiled down to, "You can trust me, I'm your friend, this is a good deal." So the senator could barely get a word in edgewise before Biden just hung up. Moments after he hung up, this is great. Moments after he hung up, another cell phone rang, and it was Biden again. Unaware that the group was all together, Biden proceeded to call each one of them, one after the other, delivering pretty much the same spiel. Biden's flimsy argument, the filibustering style of delivering, became pretty much a running joke among the senators. No one found it remotely persuasive, said one person in the room. And again, imagine what they may be thinking about this guy now, like 10 years down the road, 10 times probably more senile and more just, completely out to frickin' lunch he is now. Biden's own characterization of his own lobbying efforts didn't really differ substantially from the recollection of those in the room. Asked that day by reporters what he had said to wavering senators, he replied, "I said, this is Joe Biden, I'm your buddy." Ultimately, it fell to Reid to drag the progressive senators into line. Once it was clear the White House was on board with Biden's deal and McConnell was in, that meant it would be 70 to 80 votes for, and, the progressive bloc could vote no, but it would only send a message of discord and have no really effect on the outcome. Reid told them, coaxing pretty much the senators to support the deal he himself loathed. In the end, all the progressive senators except for Harkin voted for the deal. It passed 89-8. Years later, Reid still regrets how it went down. "If we had gone over the cliff, we would have resources to do a lot of good things with the country. Infrastructure development, but it didn't work out that way," Reid said. "Letting all the taxes go back to the pre-Bush levels would have yielded the Treasury around $3 trillion over the last 10 years, over 10 years. Instead, the deal ultimately brought around $600 billion, or would have if taxes had not been slashed again by Republicans in 2018. Without the deal, taxes on dividend payments to the rich would have been set at 39.6%. On the term of the deal, they were set at 20%, meaning the super wealthy would be paying lower taxes on their passive dividend income than working people would pay on their salaries." I asked Reid how Biden defended the strategy that day. "It wasn't one I agreed with," he replied politely, "so you'd have to ask some of his people," and his people declined to comment because at the end of the day, they had unfortunately already won. So as it comes down to it, huge shout out to Harry Reid there for that story. Kind of shows you who he was as a really kind of the last Democratic senator with a conscience in a party run by feckless idiots who don't care about any policy and making, anyone's lives better, like our current president, Joe Biden. Can't believe we elected that guy. Jesus Christ. All right, we're back Friday, trying to give you a little bit of year-end content. We'll see you then.